Welcome to Natural Habitat Adventures, Daily Dose of Nature. Today's topic, the heart of the palm, natural uses for palm trees. Presented by NatHab Expedition Leader Eleanor Edye. I'm your host, Rob Mess. Thank you all so much for being here today. Over to you, Eleanor.
Thanks, Rob, and hello to everybody who's signing in today for what's hopefully a lovely late spring or early summer day where you are to listen to me talk about palm trees for a while. I'm excited to be here today and to rattle off some interesting facts for you. And with that, I thought we'd jump right into it. You might wonder, why choose to talk about palm trees? Well, palm trees are one of the most ecologically important as well as taxonomically diverse plant groups. They contribute to species diversity and food web diversity. They're key structural components, especially in tropical environments and forests, as well as being widely used by humans for economic and cultural purposes. With all that, the main reason that my brain jumped into doing a webinar on palm trees when I was looking for a topic was that last year, another guide and I were doing some traveling. And if you ever wonder what guides do in their off time, they get together and they do more nerdy things, and they get extra nerdy and they do things like look at palm trees in deserts and look at mosses. And we were sitting underneath some palm trees, and this other guide told me how much she hates palm trees. And I couldn't possibly understand why anybody could hate the beautiful palm trees that we were sitting underneath. So I set out to better understand palm trees and to hopefully convert her into what I think is the more appropriate love of them. So today we're going to be talking about kind of the biology of palm trees and what sets them apart from other trees. And then we'll also talk about why they're important ecologically, as well as in the human context, because humans are great users of palm trees in various forms. So we can talk about that as well. So what do I even mean when I say palm tree? Palm tree, it's a common term, right? It's not a scientific term, but it does refer to members of a particular family of plants, and that family is called Ericaceae. All of these members of the Ericaceae are perennial flowering plants, meaning that they live for multiple years and they produce flowers and fruit. And aside from that, as you can see from these various old plates here, they take a lot of different forms. They're big, they're small, they live for a short time, they live for a long time. Those that have a tree-like called palm trees, climbing or shrub-like plants are usually just called palms or sometimes palmettos, though because they are common names and by their nature imprecise, those names will vary depending on what the local conventions are. So like I said, they can be small, they can be big, they can be climbing, they can be standalone, they can have palmates, meaning, leaves that look like a hand, or pinnate leaves, leaves that look more like feathers. Around the world, there are around 2,600 species in 181 genera. They are mostly found in tropical and subtropical zones, as you might expect. Like when you think going to the tropics, you probably think palm trees or sitting under a palm tree on the beach. As far as the flowering plants go, they're a pretty old group, and they likely first evolved around 60 to 70 million years ago. Like I said, they are important to humans, but they're also important to other animals and to the ecosystems that they exist in general. In terms of where they live, this map that's popping up here shows the native ranges of the palm trees or palm species of the world. This is an approximation and it only represents the native ranges. There are a lot of palm trees and palm shrubs in cultivation in zones outside these ones. And if you're willing to work at it, you can force a plant to grow many different places. But in terms of where you could walk out your door and expect to see a palm, this is approximately the zones where palms are native. So you can see they're native to every continent except Antarctica, North America, Europe, Australia, as well as subtropical Asia, most of Africa and most of South America do have palms within their vegetation zones. So let's start off by saying, what even are they? My subtitle here is like, are they even trees? Because if you were to go on your phone right now and Google the term palm tree, you would get a whole bunch of information. Some of it will be gardening and cultivation sites. Some of it will be human history and palm trees. And you might see one of those little sections that says other questions people also ask. And one of those common questions that people always ask are, wait, are palm trees even trees? Didn't somebody tell me years ago that palm trees weren't trees? So I'm here to tell you in short that the usual answer is no. I'll tell you why people say that. But here's the thing, the answer depends on whether you're looking at it from a botanical point of view, and we'll talk through what the differences are and why they're different than your regular type of trees and how that makes them different in the ecosystem as well. So if you ask a botanist, which is what I do, if you ask me, a tree as a large woody plant with a single main stem, usually be counted as a tree if it has a single stem at the point where it's at about 1.7 meters off the ground, and exhibiting secondary growth, meaning it grows laterally as well as height-wise. So many palms can meet part of these, but none of them meet that definition in full. And that's because palms, as a family, the Ericaceae, belong to a group of flowering plants called the monocots. So if you're a gardener, you do any horticulture, you're probably flowering plants are divided into two major cots and the monocots, and they are defined by a number of different characters, but first and foremost by the number of cotyledons that come out of the seed. Monocot, when it pokes its first leaf out of the seed, it has one seed leaf. When a dicot pokes its leaves out of a seed, it has two leaves that come out. And that is the first and biggest major division in our plant taxonomy. Our monocot group is overwhelmingly things like our cereal crops. So it's a lot of grasses. It also includes lilies and orchids. Dicots kind of represent most things that we normally recognize as flowering plants. They're pretty flower, but they're coconut there in the left-hand side picture. It's showing us it's single, that basal leaf coming out there is a single leaf. So palms are monocots. They're quite big. There's a number of other things that separate them as well. If you look on the right-hand side of the image there, it seems to be different. The arrangement of the vascular tissue with the venation is different as well. And some of the floral structure is also different. I'm just getting a note that my internet connection is unstable, so I'm going to go ahead and turn off my webcam and hopefully prioritize the audio here. Pardon me if it's been cutting in and out. So while the monocots are usually small plants, there's around 60,000 of them. Some of them can be large as well. So we think rice, wheat, maize, so things like corn, sugarcane, but we also have big plants like the bamboos also are monocots. So they're a type of kind of overgrown grass, if you would. And then we also have the pandanus plants on the right-hand side there, which are called the screw pines. They're a palm-like type of plants that are also within the monocot groups. And then the other big one is the palms. So there are only those few, really three groups of large, like biologically big species, the bamboo, the pandanus, and the palms. And really, when it comes down to are they trees or are they not, how do they react differently than other trees? One of the big differences between our monocots and our dicots is the capacity for secondary growth. Secondary growth is, let me back up. So plants usually, not always, but usually have something called indeterminate growth. They're not like you and I. You and I, we have a height that we get to, and then we stop growing height-wise at least. We might grow width-wise, but we don't grow height-wise anymore. That means for most plants, they continue to grow larger throughout their life, and they may not have an exactly well-defined maximum size. Trees and shrubs have that they tend to have that indeterminate growth that they show. And because that's called primary growth, and primary growth is when it's growing taller or longer, like newly branching stems or longer growing roots. Whereas secondary growth is when those features become wider or thicker. So it's like you see your first branch coming off a plant, and then year over year after that, that branch is getting thicker and wider to help support the rest of the plants. So we see this in woody plants. Stems become trunks, branches become bigger, and this outward growth is quite significant for these tall woody plants because you couldn't have a tall plant without that secondary supportive growth. It would, all of these things that we know as trees would just collapse under their weight without this secondary growth. With dicots, they have what's called a lateral meristem. This is a site where you have a group of cells that are capable of dividing and becoming other tissues. In humans, we don't really have that beyond the point that we're born, right? We have stem cells, and those stem cells cease to be part of us for the most part once we're born. Plants are not limited by this because they have these meristematic regions where at the regions where these specialized cells occur, they grow and divide and can become any structure needed for the plant. And if you look at the middle image here, that is an image of a cross-section of a dicot stem where all of the vascular bundles are arranged in this lovely circle. The way that that plant grows outwards is by kind of the middle points of those vascular bundles are able to divide and grow out in either direction, so that new tissue is being created in both directions every year as that plant grows out. And as that plant grows out, in seasonal areas, the secondary growth gives us tree rings. The light-colored bands in these are usually the cells produced early in the season where they're very wide and capable of conducting a lot of water, for example. And then as growth slows down later in the summer, the cells produced are smaller and thicker, looking to our eyes like they're darker, creating those darker tree rings. In areas like where I live in Canada, this seasonality is usually temperature dependent, but it can also be in other areas, it can be dependent on the wet-dry cycle, for example. It doesn't have to be temperatures. Anything that limits tree growth can give you these rings like this. So this kind of growth, let me just back up for a second here, it's really only possible when you have this dicot type of system. If you are if you're a palm tree, or if you're a bamboo, or if you're a pandanus, or even if you're a grass who decides it wants to become a tree, you don't have the same setup of vascular bundles. If you recall, the way that the vascular tissue was laid out in a monocot is that it's randomly distributed throughout the plant. So here is what a cut down palm tree looks like on the inside. Does it mean that there's no secondary growth? Well, technically, yes. And here I'm going to be a pedantic botanist and tell you that the trunk it's hard, and we have to use brackets woody, but it's not wood, because by definition, as a botanist, wood is secondary growth. What creates the woody texture? And here's what happens if you're a palm tree trying to grow bigger. So yes, here's our stem again. So here's your dicot on your left and your monocot on your right. So as I was just saying, you've got those vascular bundles that are randomly distributed throughout the plants. There's that palm tree that was supposed to be up a minute ago there. Sorry about that. So if you're saying to yourself, what are botanists talking about? When I see a palm tree grow, it is small. It is not as wide as it is when it is an adult. What is going on? Well, pedantic botanist again, palm trees undergo a process that's called unusual primary growth. Thank you. So during the years where palms are seedlings, when they are rapidly growing, what they do is produce numerous roots from the base of their short stem. Think like the same of the roots on corn or bamboo, if you've grown bamboo in a flower pot or something. And each root that comes out adds extra vascular bundles and extra vascular tissue to that plant's circumference. And then the portion of the stem above the root then gets that many extra bundles as well. So they are thereby able to increase their width, not by actually having secondary growth, but actually producing new roots that then grow upwards to have new vascular bundles that attach to the plant. This is not something that can continue forever. At some point, this process does cease and no new roots are established, and the conducting capacity is set for the lifetime of the plant. It's why broken palm trees can't recover like other trees that can form wood and can form something called reaction wood to shore up broken parts. And if we look back again at that cross section there, what's going on there, why it looks thick and woody, it's because all those little vascular bundles that have been added on by those extra roots are enclosed within a sheath of fibers. So it gives us that tree structure without having our technical definition of what a tree is. And now whenever somebody says to you, did you know the palm trees aren't really trees? You can say, well, I do know why, and I can tell you why. So let's talk about it. And what this means is not only are they not able to recover if they're broken, but here's the thing, they're much, much less likely to break because they don't have that very firm woody tissue that's built into them. Species of palm trees have actually evolved to withstand winds up to 145 miles per hour. So hurricane speed winds that uproot other trees and destroy buildings just can leave palm trees completely unscathed. There are some species that are able to bend up to a 50-degree angle without snapping. So that very thin fibrous root system that grows very much outward keeps the palm upright in those winds. Unlike trees that have a single big root, the palm has that fibrous system, so it's more like a carpet that's holding it up. And that vast quantity of roots are able to provide a wider support base. So all of that to get us to the understanding that they're not botanically trees, but are they ecologically trees? Of course they are ecologically trees. They are absolutely trees in an ecosystem. They are tree-shaped, they are tree-sized, they fulfill a tree role, they provide shade and shelter and habitats and resources for other species in a forest, whether or not they have a particular vascular system in them. I would very much argue does not change the fact that they're actually trees. So 2 answers, 1 question. You can now get far too into this with all your neighbors who have palm trees. Okay, let's move on and talk about some of the palm distribution and palm ecology. So I already had this image up, but you can see where palms grow because palms like it warm. If you're in the US and you're using a USDA planting zone to kind of follow along here, zones 8 to 10 are considered capable of growing palms. The great centers of palm distribution are in South America and then in Southern Asia. They like having mean temperatures between around 60 and 70 Fahrenheit and about 20 inches of up to about 20 inches of rain per year. There's some variation, of course, because like I said, there's around 2,600 species. Of those 2,600 species, none of them except the European fan palm, which is found in Europe and in Northern Africa, and the coconut occurs naturally on more than one continent. Humans have been really good at taking pretty palm species and putting them in our yards and in our gardens, but naturally they tend to be quite localized to where they naturally evolved. So I just grabbed this next image here off the internet because that's how I think many of us picture palm trees. When I think palm trees, I think tropical vacation, I think beach, I think relaxation and sand, but that's absolutely not the only type of place that we can find palms. They are adapted to many, many habitats within those geographic limits. While I might associate them with tropical shores, there's other places where they're prominent features on the landscape as well. This is an example of palm trees dominating the sites in a tropical rainforest. And in fact, most palms are palms of tropical rainforests. They like lots of rain, but well-drained acid soils. They do well in lowlands and forests up to around 3,000 feet or so. And there's a handful of species that grow up to around 10,000 feet, actually, which is pretty amazing. We can also find palm savanna. So this is an image from central Argentina. So this is all just to give you an idea that it's not just rainforests. There's the palms on the beaches, there's palms in savannas, there's palms in swamps, in estuaries, in deserts. In short, palms are in most places as long as you're in the tropics. Because they're such a diverse group and they've had a long time to evolve since their beginnings, they have many, many different ecologies, and they've found their niches within the tropical zones. I can't talk about all 2,600 species, but I thought we'd focus on some that have a large impact on their local ecology, and then ones that have had a large impact on human ecology as well. I picked two North American species to talk about for your being important for their ecology. So if you're living in the US, you can appreciate maybe what's in your backyard. And then the ones I'm going to talk about for the economics and human history are more worldwide species. Oh, before I get into that, there was actually one cool thing I wanted to say. In terms of how different they are. So just as a note, how do palms get around? Palms previously were all thought to be wind pollinated, same as the grasses are and as a lot of our tree species are as well. But now we know that multiple strategies, which includes wind, but also birds and insects, gets used for pollination. This particular image that I put up here is quite weird. It's actually it's called a talipot palm. It's a species of palm native to southern India, sometimes called the century palm. It has the largest inflorescence, meaning group of flowers of any plant anywhere in the world. It's got several million small flowers on a small stalk. And this particular plant only flowers once in its life. It grows about 70 to 80 years old. It flowers, it produces seeds, and then it dies. So, little sense of the differences going on here. But let's move on and talk about my personal favorite palm, which is the California fan palm. Species name is Washingtonia filifera. It is one of the longer lived, up to 250 years or more year old species. And it's native to the far southwestern US, as well as Baja California and Mexico. It grows about 60 feet tall, and it can be up to about 20 feet wide, actually. So it's kind of a squat palm, but very tall as well. The fronds themselves are quite long. I think they're quite beautiful trees. And as you can see from this image here, I took this on a hike in Anza Borrega State Park when I was doing some plant surveys in there, and it is a desert oasis palm. It's native, like I said, to the California region. Coming up here with a map there. It is a very small, very patchy distribution. So they're not found in a great big swath across California and Baja California. It is very patchy, and the primary populations are in those desert wet habitats. So spring-fed and stream-fed oases in the deserts. Both in the Colorado deserts, the Sonoran Desert, the Gila Desert, and a number of other isolated locations. As you can imagine, in a really harsh habitat like this, they provide incredibly important microhabitat for a number of species that are very, very reliant upon them for many things. One of the species that relies on the California fan palm is this little guy called the western yellow bat, who is a species of vesper bat found in in Mexico and southwestern US, so it does overlap nearly completely with the range of the California fan palm. And it roosts in trees like the California fan palm. So they like to use those dead fronds that encircle the California fan palm trees. I'll just go back for a second to that one especially. You can see how those dead leaves, they actually hang down as the palm continues to grow up. And those dead fronds, as they hang down, provide an important roosting site for a number of species, including this western yellow bat. We do consider it a species of least concern. It's doing very well, but it is very reliant on those particular palm trees. Another reliant species is the hooded oriole, which is a lovely species of bird. So their breeding habitat is in open areas with palm trees across the southwestern US and northern Mexico. And their nest is a tightly woven pouch that gets attached to the underside of one of those palm branches. They're not completely dependent on them. They will use other species as well, but they do quite like the California palm. So there are also a host of other insects. I was debating putting up lots of insect photos here because there are probably hundreds of insects that are reliant on those California fan palms, but I elected to stay with the birds and the mammals just for showing pretty things. Well, let's go off to the other coast and look at something that's important on the East Coast. And this is the sometimes called the Cuban royal palm or Florida royal palm. This is Roystonea regia, and it's a species of palm that's native to the Caribbean and Florida, as well as parts of Central America. You've probably seen it if you live in Florida, if you've ever visited. It's very big, it's very attractive. It's been planted throughout the tropics and subtropics as an ornamental tree. It grows up to 80 feet tall, and it is pollinated by animals, this particular species, including honeybees and a variety of species of bats. And if you're not sure if you've ever seen this tree, let me show you a close-up detail so you can go, oh yeah, that one. It's got a very distinctive smooth part of the tree is called the crown shaft. And if you look down towards the bottom half of the tree where it's browner, you can see those circular leaf scars that go all the way around the stem. So this particular species, like I mentioned, it is visited by pollen collecting bees. It's considered a nectar source for a number of native bee species. It also has been reported to be a source of food via pollen for the Cuban flower bats, Leach's single leaf bats, the Jamaican fruit bats, as well as the social flycatcher. So it also serves as a host plant for a number of butterflies that are native to the region as well. Cute little species here, the palm chats, who is endemic to the island of Hispaniola, really depends on these royal palms for their nest sites. So if you take a look here at the left-hand side at the base of those palm fronds, which is well above where humans or any other animal disturbance could happen, this is where they build their communal nests, who will actually support up to 30 different females who will all nest together. And these birds are really only found using the royal palm as a nest site. So those are not endangered birds, but this next guy coming up here is an endangered species who's also reliant on the royal palm. This is the Florida bonneted bat. And it is Florida's only endemic flying mammal. So it's the only endemic bat, and it's only one of 2 endangered bat species in Florida. It's the bigger one of the 2, and they live exclusively in southern Florida. They roost in cavities that have been made usually by woodpeckers or other mammals that have dug into trees. And it was thought to be common on Florida's eastern coast, and by the 1980s, it was actually thought to be extinct. But a population has been since found and has been seen roosting in these particular palm trees. Now, palms in Florida in general are really important, not just for the animals that use them. Of course, that's really important, but they're also important for the ecosystem health in general as well. Like some other species that, like legumes, they contain root nodules which have nitrogen-fixing bacteria in them. So these plants are able to produce their own fertilizer just by growing in concert with these bacteria. And it's the only record that we have of root nodules in this type of tree, in a monocot. So palms as a whole are quite vital to preserving Florida's wetlands and coastal ecosystems. Not only do they provide nutrients and capture nutrients and ameliorate soil health, they also offer resilience against extreme weather events, including those big storm surges and winds that come in during those big storms. So they are quite important in this habitat. They protect our coasts, they do an awful lot for our soils, and historically and currently, palms have done an awful lot for humans overall. So let's segue into talking about what palms have done directly for humans, and usually, possibly if you're thinking of palms and you're not thinking of palms on a beach, what you do think of. This might be what comes up here. All right, anybody have any guesses what we're looking at here? Well, that is a date palm. So there's some dates. This is what it looks like when they're all dried and ready for human consumption. They're ready to eat, easy to travel with, and when they are growing on the tree. There are a number of species of date palms, but they usually look something like that. So dates have been cultivated. There's evidence of cultivation in the Middle East and the Indus Valley for thousands of years. At least 6,000 years of cultivation of dates. And these days, the total annual world production of dates is 8.5 million metric tons, which is an awful lot of dates. Like I said, there's multiple species of date palms, between 12 and 19 species of wild dates. They have been bred into a number of cultivars, depending what kind of features you're looking for. So there's over 400 cultivars of dates. And when they are dried, they are up to about 70% sugar by weight when they're dry. So that is they're pretty well just fiber and sugar. If you've ever tried dates, that describes it pretty well. Some cool things about dates, well, they have separate male and female plants. You can grow them pretty easily from seed, but if you're growing dates, you'll probably want to focus on the female plants because they're the only ones who are going to give you fruit, of course. And that fruit is remarkably long lasting. So when it's dried, it can be safe for human consumption for many years. And in fact, not only is it safe for consumption, there's been reported germination of dates after seed storage after 2,000 years. So this was actually accidental seed storage in this case. They discovered an ancient repository of dates stored, and multiple trees have now been grown from that accidental date storage after 2,000 years of storage. I think that's pretty amazing. They are naturally wind pollinated, but in cultivation, they're usually pollinated by hand to increase the number of dates that are produced. Now, the next picture that's going to pop up here is another type of palm tree that has a very outsized presence in our lives, and it's going to look a lot like this one that we're looking at right now. So let's get through our dates and get to this one. So it looks a little bit shorter. The fruit looks quite similar. The properties of this fruit are very different, though. This is the species that produce palm oil. So the oil palm tree grows, of course, in tropical climates like our other palms, And instead of being sugar focused in the fruit like our dates were, the oil palm produces a fruit that is very, very high in oil. And that oil is high quality. In a lot of countries, it's used as a cooking fuel, but it's also used in food products and detergents and cosmetics and biofuel. And for those of us in North America, it represents a small part of our diets, but a large part of what we consume of palm products. It's found in everything from lipstick to soaps to detergents to ice cream. And the amount that we consume has rapidly gone up. So it's kind of amazing how much it has crept into our diets and our lives. Here's a picture coming up here of a palm oil plantation. Globally, on average, we each consume about 8 kilograms of palm oil a year. And 8 kilograms, so around 20 pounds, it doesn't sound like that much. Like if you think about how much beef you eat or how much milk you consume or how many pounds of flour you eat, you know, all of those amounts would likely dwarf the amount of palm oil you consume. But I'd ask you to think about pointing at where that palm oil is in your house and in your life and see if you can actually identify where those products are. Because for most of us, we don't consciously purchase products that have palm oil. It's stuff that's snuck into our diet and our consumption. So there's our palm oil plantation. Around the world, palm oil plantations account for 10% of permanent global cropland. I think that's an absolutely like mind-blowing number. One of the reasons that it has really exploded in use is the removal of trans fats from North American diets and from European diets as well. So back in 2015, the US Food and Drug Administration gave all food manufacturers 3 years to remove trans fats from margarines, from cookies, from cakes, from popcorn, from all those delicious things that we eat. And pretty well all of those trans fats that would have previously been things like hydrogenated canola oil has now been replaced with palm oil. And of those 8 kilograms that you're consuming on average every year, 85% of that comes just from Malaysia and Indonesia. Now, in terms of why we care about this, well, you probably heard about what palm oil does to the ecosystem. Because we're using up so much land, this represents large areas of tropical forests and other ecosystems that have high conservation values that maybe support many, many species that have then been cleared to make room for this, this vast monoculture of palm plantations. And this next image coming up here will give you an idea kind of what that looks like. We really do remove the entire forest to put in palm plantations. Now, I should mention that WWF has taken a very active role in working with manufacturers and working with the countries affected to better manage palm oil plantations, because we recognize that this is a product that's important globally, but it can be done at with better practices without operating at the expense of rainforests, and by applying stringent production criteria to all stages of this palm manufacture. Things that WWF are doing are things like defining what those better practices look like, encouraging companies to use certified sustainable palm oil and products that they make. And one of the big things that comes up is in a number of areas, there are actually incentives that lead to the destruction of these forests. So countries may directly subsidize this type of forestry. So WWF is actually lobbying to remove these incentives. So that's a sad picture, and I don't want to end on that, because palm oil, while it is important, and as far as all the palm products that we consume, it's probably number one on the list. I think the one that we usually think of when we think of how humans and palms work together are the coconut tree or the coconut palms. So these coconut palms, remember I said that there were only 2 species that naturally are found on more than one continent. And one of them was the European fan palm and this guy, which is the coconut palm. So coconuts, if you've ever taken a look at one, they're quite distinct from other fruits. They're incredibly large. They're very heavy when they first fall off the tree. And they contain some very rich interior substances, both coconut water, also called coconut juice, and then we also have the very heavy, fibrous, very fatty substance that comes out as well. We as humans use everything from the dried coconuts. We use the coconut milk to fry in. We use coconut oil. We use it in soaps and cosmetics. We can make palm wine by fermenting it. You can make coconut vinegar also by fermenting it. We use the hard shells. We use the leaves for furnishing and decoration or art. So it's been something that we have historically used in many, many different capacities. So here's a palm here, just starting to emerge from a shell. The coconut palm, it likes sandy soils and it likes, it's very tolerant of salt or high salinity levels. So it likes areas with lots of sun, with lots of rainfall. It doesn't mind it where it's sandy. It doesn't mind it where it is salty. All that tells me where you're going to find it. You're going to find it on a lovely beach somewhere. So that is often where you find them, but not the only places. They do need, of course, warmth as well. So where are we? Let's just move on. So coconut fruits and coconut palms, take a look at this map here. Excuse me. They have played this really interesting critical role in human history in Australasia by providing a portable source of food and water. And some number of years ago, when I was in my undergraduate program and I was taking biogeography and we talked about coconuts, and we were taught that coconuts are they're good at spreading themselves because the seeds can float in water and they can make their way down to beaches, and they're designed to be carried on ocean currents. Well, we have actually learned in the decades since that is not actually how coconuts have spread. Coconuts and humans are entirely tied together in terms of how they have moved around the world. And we can actually track coconuts and humans kind of respectively, looking at one or the other, because as seafaring people move on to new islands, they brought coconuts with them as that source of portable food and water, and then you plant it to allow you to explore to the next island and to have a source of food and water on your new island home. We know that this has been a very active process, and it has been established as an important food for sailors of all kinds. If you ever read books on the history of exploration, often when you read the journals of these explorers and these captains, they will spend an awful lot of time talking about whether or not a certain area had palm trees and whether it had coconut trees specifically. Because if there weren't coconut trees, it wasn't even really worth landing because there wasn't anything to take there. So they were very recognized as important in the history of moving humans around. Genetic studies have identified that coconuts probably came from the central Indo-Pacific, somewhere between Southeast Asia and Melanesia, and we can track that back based on the genetics. And as I said, you can then track the canoe paths of how people moved around based on where the coconut trees showed up as they moved. So here some are growing on a beach. Like I said, it used to be claimed that they dispersed by marine currents, but we now know that that is generally not the case. If you've ever read the book Kon-Tiki, any of the work by Thor Heyerdahl or some of the earlier stuff, the The thinking used to be that they could travel up to around 110 days or about 3,000 miles and still be able to germinate. We've repeated that number in an awful lot of places, but it actually turned out to be, this is only from a single study with a very, very, very small sample size. So we don't think that they can actually last nearly that long, perhaps a couple of weeks, but really not much more. And all that distribution was done by humans. So to wrap up, I'd like to leave us with some of the world's weirdest palms. This is the world's tallest palm, the Quindinio wax palm. It is native to the humid forests of the Andes in Colombia and Peru, and it can grow to a height of 150 feet, perhaps even as high as 200 feet in some isolated cases. Next weird palm here, this is the coldest weather growing palm. This is called the Chinese fan palm or the fountain palm. It can tolerate temperatures down to around 22 degrees Fahrenheit or -6 Celsius. So that is a very, very cold tolerant palm as it goes. Next up, another weird palm of the world for you. This is the oldest palm on record. This is a palm found in Western Australia in the Kimberley region, Livistona eastonii. It grows up to 720 years. For that reason, and because it is so incredibly slow growing, you'll actually basically never find it being cultivated anywhere. It's only found in its native habitat in the Kimberley region. And last but not least, the worst palm to run into in the dark. This is a palm native to tropical Australia. It's often called wait a while, because if you run into it, you're going to be stuck there for a while. It is a creeping palm, so it doesn't support itself. It actually creeps up and grabs onto other plants in the canopy. And if you look at it, this is the same plant, left and right images here. You can see the base of the plant is incredibly spiky. You would not want to walk into that. And then its climbing tendrils on the right-hand side have these backward-facing barbs that are incredibly strong. And if you walk into it without noticing, it will actually rip your clothing and perhaps your skin right open as well. So, least favorite palm to run into in the dark. Lots of cool palms out there. Lots more we can't talk about. I hope that we've whetted an interest for palms and learned something and maybe appreciate the palms that you might have in your backyard or on your next vacation a little bit. And with that, I will hand things over for questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Now, before we start in with the question and answer session, I would like to remind everyone that you can submit your questions via the question field in your control panel. So let me ask you, are fern trees part of the palm family?
Great question, because fern trees can look really similar to palm trees and they can have a very similar growth pattern, and they're found in some of the same areas. But fern trees are actually taxonomically ferns. So ferns are a much older group of plants that don't reproduce by seeds and by producing fruit. They actually reproduce by an unprotected spore. And if you're ever in an area with fern trees, you can get close to them, maybe climb up or look at a young plant, and underneath on the bottom side of those fern trees, you will see spores, just like you would if you looked at a smaller fern in your backyard in North America. So they are completely different taxonomically, so their genes are fully separate from our palms, even though they can look superficially similar. Great question.
Do palm trees lack the tree rings?
Correct, yeah. So palm trees will never produce tree rings like we know of in many of our tree species in more temperate areas. Because of the structure of the stem itself and how the vascular bundles aren't all laid out in a nice ring, they are completely incapable of ever producing tree rings, even if it's like one of those 700-year-old species I was just talking about. So for us to date a palm, you actually have to do it by a different method, and that can depend on the species. Some of them, you just have to know when they were planted to know how old they are. Some of them may produce a set number of leaves every year, so you might be able to count the number of leaf scars um, on the plant to see how many leaves it's produced and thereby give you an estimate on the age. And some other ones simply go by estimates of height. So you can say, oh, it's 80 feet high, so it's about 80 years old or so. It's going to depend on the species for being able to date them. But overall, when we have species that don't produce those rings, it makes dating them quite a bit more challenging.
Very interesting. Thank you. So, do the roots of the pandan palm function like the roots of, say, mangroves?
Yeah, that's another great question. I'm actually just going to scroll way back here to where we were looking at that pandanus. There we go. So the pandanus there is on the right-hand side of that image. And these, like I said, the common name for the pandanus group is called the screw pines, or sometimes the walking pines, because you can see those very tall roots almost look like they allow the tree to walk, especially if it's falling over in one direction. They're not, they don't for, pardon me, they don't serve the same purpose necessarily as a mangrove's roots do. When we think about mangrove roots, and if you watched the webinar a couple of weeks ago, you probably know that one of the functions of a mangrove root is not just to go out there and find fresh water and to find nutrients and collect it back and send it up to the leaves of the plant, but it's actually to provide a site for gas exchange. So because those roots are underwater a lot of the time, they need to breathe as well. And the only way for those roots to get the oxygen that they need is by sending up those little snorkel roots, or those knees that we see. Because these pandanus plants they're not growing in submerged habitat. These are usually coastal species. What these do is they help the tree find more sources of water, and they help the tree grow larger and put on that widthwise growth. And that's, what do we call it? That's the false primary growth, or the unusual primary growth, that allows the tree to get bigger without actually being able to make wood.
Great, thank you. So, can you find palm trees at 10,000 feet?
Can you find palm trees at 10,000 feet? Well, not in many areas, but yes, you can. They are only known from one area in South America, but there are a couple of species that do make it up around that 10,000 foot mark, which is pretty fantastic, isn't it? We don't really think of them as growing in the mountains, and not at 10,000 feet.
It's intriguing, isn't it? So, do you expect palms to do better during climate change?
Yeah, it's a really broad question as to whether palms will do better in climate change as we see things warming up. And, there's a lot of different parts to climate change depending where you are. It may mean for some species, for example, like the ones that are living in cloud forests, that they no longer get an adequate source of moisture if those cloud forests disappear, because the amount of humidity isn't there anymore. If we're thinking about coastal palms, the one that, tolerate salty soils, tolerate a lot of wind, like it hot, don't mind if it's windy, they will likely continue to do well as our global temperatures rise and as we see more severe weather. And in fact, for example, the state of Florida, all municipalities and counties and regional zones, they have tree plans that they look at for the next 50 to 100 years. And a lot of parts of Florida, as they're looking at replacing old and dying trees, they're looking at bringing in more native palms in particular, knowing that those palms are really resilient to the type of weather that Florida tends to see, and that not all palms are created equally, and not all palms, should have a place right on the beach in Florida, and not all palms, even though they might look pretty, should be on your boulevard outside on your front street. So a lot of these species are being looked at in the context of climate change in the next 50 to 100 years as the next trees that more areas should look at using in their urban zones.
So when a coconut does fall from a tree, is it falling because it's ripe, or can they be more ripe on the tree? Do we have any idea?
They generally fall because they're ripe. I think if you ask my friend who hates palm trees, she would say that they fall because they are out to get her, and I'm pretty sure that's the reason that she never liked palm trees to start with. Um, they are known to cause damage. You don't want to take a nap under a palm tree that's ready to drop a coconut on you. So they can be, analogous to picking an apple off a tree. Once an apple is fully ripe, it's going to fall off a tree anyway, but you can pick it off beforehand, and it might be a little bit better the day beforehand, but it will come off when it's ready to drop. Like coconuts, while humans use them for food, and while we are their main distribution source, so we are the ones who carry coconuts around the world and plant them, um, every time a human eats a coconut, that coconut doesn't get to grow. So we have a relationship with them in that they're dependent on us to be spread around, but we also eat a lot of the seeds. Um, and I'm mentioning this because in a lot of species that are dependent on animals to eat them, they usually will not drop until they are ripe. They're evolved for that. Um, there are some exceptions to that rule, like avocados that would never ripen on the tree. But coconuts can ripen on the tree, and you can also get them off the tree when they're a little bit younger, depending what you want out of your fruit. If you want more coconut water, it's nice to pick it early while it's still fairly young. And if you want more coconut flesh, if you want it to be more fatty, you generally wait till it falls off the tree.
Great. Thank you for covering that. Unfortunately, that's going to be the last question that we do have time for today. So I'd like to hand it back to you for some closing comments.
All right. Thanks, Robin. Thanks, everybody, for coming by today. I hope that we've opened our eyes a little bit to all the cool things palms can do. I know that I learned stuff while putting this together. I always thought palms were cool, and now I think they're even more cool. So thanks for joining in, and I hope the rest of your day is fantastic. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you so much for taking the time to present for us today. And I'd like to thank everyone who tuned in today. If you're interested in information on how you can travel with NatHab, give us a call at the number on your screen, or you can send us an email at info@nathab.com. Our adventure specialists are happy to help you out. Join us tomorrow for our next Daily Dose of Nature. You can check out this week's lineup, including registration links, on our website at nathab.com/webinars. We did record today's presentation, and we will have the replay available on our website soon. With that, I will conclude the webinar. Goodbye, everybody. We'll see you next time.